Hello, welcome to this video. We're going to assess ISO performance in two cameras, the 7D Mark II and the 90D. I will be bringing some conclusions to this video, but however, I would like you to please bear with me regarding this assessment because it may take some time to go into these images and look at them. And we've got different ISOs. And obviously there's two cameras, the 7D Mark II and the 90D. And what I want to do is assess and compare ISO performance in an averagely lit scene here using a light box. And we've got a Star Trek model here. And I want to look at detail. But the thing is, you need to take into account that the 7D Mark II is a 20 megapixel camera, where the 90D, I think it's a 32.5 megapixel camera, something like that. So there is going to be a big difference when you start trying to zoom in and assess ISO performance. So just keep that in mind in this video. But we've got different ISOs to look at. Hopefully this video will be informative, giving you a rough idea on the performance of these two cameras at various ISO ratings. Obviously the 7D natively max out at 16,000 ISO, where the 90D maxes out at 2,500 and 600 ISO. Obviously that's 25,600, just to make that clear. So you know, clearly the 90D can go up to much higher ISOs than the 7D does natively. Yes, you can expand that a little bit, but we're just going to look at the native ISOs that we can expand to. So without further ado, let's look at the 7D Mark II at 100 ISO. So we have an image here to look at. Obviously this is a 100 ISO, so you're not going to see much there really. I like to do is zoom in there at 300%. Ideally that's as much as you really want to be going in, and as you can see ISO is pretty good. So let's move up the ladder and move to 500 ISO. Again, it's our Star Trek model. I'm choosing this area here just above the top of the ship and having a look at the background to have a look at the ISO performance. So at 500, let's go at 300% again. ISO performance at 500 ISO looks reasonably good. Obviously it's a low ISO, so you're not going to see much there. So let's move up the ladder to ISO 2000. Let's zoom in there at 300%. We can see that it's still holding up very good at 2000 ISO. Let's have a look at the next image, which is going to be at 5000 ISO. So let's zoom in there, and we can see we're getting a bit of noise there in the 7D Mark II. So obviously the next image is going to be at 10,000 ISO. So let's have a look how that performs. Zoom in there, and we can see that noise is certainly coming into the image here. All these white bits that you can see, if we go right in there at 400%, you can see we're getting some noise in there at 10,000 ISO. So the final image on the 7D Mark II I have for you is 16,000. So let's have a look. Let's just zoom in there into 300%. Obviously you can see it's starting to become a bit grainy. Typically speaking, in old school photography terms, we used to call when you used higher ISO, it just got really grainy. These days with digital technology and digital cameras, they call it noise. Essentially it's the same thing. It's graining your image. That obviously makes your image less sharp. The higher up you go up the ISO, obviously the less sharp your images become. So obviously looking at this image at 400% there, you can see we've got a lot of ISO going off a lot of noise. I mean, in the ISO, and you can obviously see it's a bit grainy. So if we look over here, it's a bit grainy. We can't really zoom in more than that, because when we start zooming into 20 megapixels at say 500%, 600%, you start to see pixelization in the image. That's the advantage of a higher megapixel camera. You can zoom in a lot more. So in the 90D's favour, obviously you can zoom in even more, so before you start seeing pixelization. But so let's have a look at the 90D next, 100 ISO. So image looks really clean. Again, let's zoom in there. We need to really get in there to see any sort of noise performance at 200% there, 300% there, and it's giving us a good result. But then again, 100 ISO is very low, so we're not going to see anything there. So let's move up the scale at 500. So this is 500 ISO. Again, the image looks very, very clean, very nice. Let's zoom in there on the 90D. Obviously, it's not that grainy there, so we're seeing some good performance on this particular image at ISO 500. So there's no major problems there that I can see. So let's move up the ladder to ISO 2000. So again, image is looking and holding up quite well. You need to zoom in there to have a look. We're pixel peeping to have a look at ISO to see how it performs. So this is what this video is all about. So let's just move in there a little bit more up to the 200%. This is where I'm starting to see some grain in the image. So we obviously call that noise at 2000. So let's just stop right there. I want to go back to the 7D Mark II, so you can have a look at the noise at 2000 ISO. So let's just quickly go over to that and zoom in there. You know, we're obviously up at 600%, and just go back to the 90D. I actually think we're seeing worse noise on the 90D than we had seen on the 7D Mark II. So we just, obviously we're only at 200%, with going at 300%, back to the 7D Mark II, and you know, I'm actually thinking it's not too bad on the 7D Mark II at 2000, where I think it's probably quite a bit worse on the 90D. So let's move up the ladder on the 90D and go to 5000 ISO. So obviously you're not going to see the ISO unless you're really high up in the ISO scale, because when we start zooming in, that's when we're going to see it. So let's zoom in there more. Okay, let's see how we're doing for the noise. I can see a lot of it here at 5000. So at 100% there, I can see absolutely a ton of noise all over the place. 200%, it looks atrocious, and that's at 5000. So let's just jump back to the 7D. I've made a note of all the file numbers so I can jump to the right one. So this is the 7D Mark II. Let's just have a look there. It just doesn't seem as bad to me. Obviously we've got less megapixels to deal with, but if we jump back to the 90D, it just looks worse. So obviously that's the 90D at 5000 ISO. Next we want to jump to 10,000 ISO on the 90D. So let's just move on to our next image. You know, looking at this already, I can see the noise in the image. You can see it around here. So let's zoom in. As you can see, it's quite obvious there's noise there. Quite obvious. Even at 50% I can see it. But this is our target area here. So let's zoom in more at 100%. So this is 10,000 ISO on the 90D. Just double check the number on there, make sure we're on the right one. That's correct. 10,000. I want to quickly jump to the 7D Mark II at 10,000 ISO. So we just got to find the correct file. And while there is a lot there, I don't think it's quite as bad. Possibly the low megapixels is helping the 7D out here, because obviously it's not as obvious as what we're getting with the 90D. I would say the pixelization isn't obvious there. Maybe that's not making it so obvious on the 90D, but I have to be honest with you, when you start zooming in there, it looks quite bad. And when we're comparing the 7D Mark II, let's look for 148 file, you know, it doesn't look quite as bad. So let's move up the scale again. So we're looking for 16,000 ISO on the 90D. So we're looking for 138 file, that's that one. It could be usable as an image, but obviously we can zoom right in there and have a look at the grain of that noise that's in that image. So let's zoom right in there. Obviously I can see it's all over the place, the noise, it just doesn't look great. I certainly wouldn't recommend using 16,000 ISO in a dimly lit room, because you will blatantly see that noise. So let's just look at that at 100%. So you can see all these white patches all the way in the image, and that's the noise that we're seeing. But let's have a look at how the top rated ISO rating on the 7D Mark II, because it maxes out at 16,000 ISO on the 7D Mark II. But just because you can go up ISO wise, don't mean you should do, in terms of how high you can raise that ISO up to. And what is ISO? Basically it's the sensitivity of your sensor. So I need to find file 150, which is that. So we're maxed out at 16,000 ISO. Let's just fit to screen so you can have a look at it. Looks very similar to the 90D in terms of the noise we're seeing. I just don't think it's quite as bad, and maybe that's the pixel count being lower is actually helping the 7D Mark II out actually here. So let's just jump back to the 90D at 16,000. Let's run 138 file there. Obviously we have to zoom in, but I think when you start looking at the noise pattern that you get in these high ISOs, I do not think the 90D is holding its own really when it comes to the low the poor ISO capabilities. When you start going, the APS-C camera doesn't do well at higher ISOs, unlike full frame cameras do. So we can actually move up the ladder even more so than the 7D Mark II, and we have ISO at 20,000. So I just need to move on and have a look at the image. So obviously that's how the image looks. So let's zoom right in there and have a look at how the ISO is performing at 20,000. Just one important note I should make. All these images were taken on the 70-200 Mark II L lens with no stabilization, on a tripod with a timer set on the cameras. So, and image stabilization was turned off. So these are as steady as you can get on a tripod, just to make sure these images are absolutely really clean and as sharp as can be. So as I said, this is 20,000 ISO. These cameras can be extended with their ISO, but I don't think you'd want to in the real world. So let's zoom in there. Let's have a look. Have a look at this ISO here, 20,000. Again, it's very grainy. Might be okay to be used in a magazine or a newspaper with small, small prints of it, but I wouldn't want to be using these images. But we can go a step even further at 25,600. So let's have a look and see how that does. So this is at 25,600 ISO, and let's just zoom in there and have a look at the ISO performance. Again, it looks really bad. Certainly you want to use this, but I did want to give you a comparison with a full frame camera. So my last image is the EOS R at 25,600. I tried to frame up the image to the same. So here is the image at 25,600 on the EOS R. So obviously this is a mirrorless camera. We want to have a look at in there and have a look at the ISO performance. And let's just see how much nicer it looks. Yes, it is quite grainy, but I do think it is usable. So let's just compare that image to the 90D's image. Let's zoom out to make it more comparable. So have we got that compared? Yep. And there's your difference. It looks atrocious on the 90D, but it looks passable and usable on the EOS R. I just wanted to give you quite a brief comparison there. So I hope this video didn't bore you too much. Please subscribe to the channel if you like my technical assessments, and like the video. At the very least, please like it, because I would really appreciate that. It will help people find videos like this and help people get to my channel. So please do that. I really need your help on that. If this video helped you out, please subscribe to the channel, obviously. But I hoped this assessment of ISO of the 7D Mark II and the 90D helped you out, as well as we looked briefly at the EOS R. I will do another video looking at the EOS R, comparing it to the 7D Mark II and the 90D, just a brief overview, so you're getting an idea of ISO performance. But ultimately, what this tells me is the 7D Mark II and the 90D are pretty much close, even though the 90D is much newer than the 7D Mark II. I tend to think that the performance of the 7D Mark II is still relevant in 2021. It's a good camera and it still does a good job. The 90D just feels like a half-hearted attempt to come up with a 7D Mark III, but I don't think it's quite there. So I suspect the next step up will be a mirrorless APS-C camera, which should be the R7 when that comes out, and I think it probably will come out at the end of this year at some time, because I think there is a space on the marketplace for a APS-C sensor mirrorless camera. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hope this video helped you out. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye bye.